Hi, everyone. I'm back and I want to talk to you about one of my favorite buildings. This is the magnificent Hagia Sophia, which is located in Istanbul and in Turkey. The reason I want to jump in here is really literally it was seeing this building, I think, when I was sitting in basically your chair when I was younger and in college that I was like, wow, I thought this was so amazing that it kind of led me down the road to where I am today, sitting in my kitchen talking about the Hagia Sophia for you. This is considered Byzantium's greatest church. It is the most important monument of early Byzantine art. The name Hagia Sophia means holy wisdom. And as we've kind of read coming into this, it was the pet project of Justinian himself, and was built really as a celebration of kind of quelling those riots that had practically ripped his empire apart. Now, it's a massive structure, as you can see, and it was built in only 5 years' time, which is quite extraordinary. And from it, we can see and tell a lot about the Byzantines. We can obviously see the kind of unusual learning and sophistication of Justinian. I want you to ignore those minarets, those towers that we see here on either side. We're going to learn about those in the next module. Those are Islamic towers. Turkey was conquered by the Ottomans, and they will convert the Hagia Sophia into a mosque. But those were not part of the original plan. And as you can see it, if you look at it, we see this kind of mountainous form, right? As we see this kind of addition of these kind of domed forms leading up to this super dome, if you will, at the top. Of course, when we see a dome like this, we immediately think of what building? As I would do to you if we were in class together. And I hope you are all saying the Pantheon. That was, of course, perhaps the most influential building in the world at this time. And Justinian very much saw himself as a continuation of the Roman emperors of the past. And this building with its giant dome was very much meant to hearken to the Pantheon. Now, Justinian is going to employ the architects Anthemius of Tralles and Isidorus of Miletus. Two kind of interesting choices. Anthemius was an artist and an expert in optics and geometry. Isidorus of Miletus was the kind of more trained one, an architect and an engineer. But both were really more mathematical theorists, and neither one of them had ever built anything previously. So they were out of the box kind of thinkers, and they created this very kind of interesting structure, which is very kind of geometrically comprised. As we can just see, this kind of, series of kind of half circles and domes and rounded surfaces, which is so kind of compelling. Now let's go inside. We see from the outside, and we really aren't ready or prepared for this kind of extraordinary interior experience. That giant dome that we see there at the top. Before we get into that, I want to kind of make you look at this plan here on the right. Here it is. And what I want you to kind of take away from this is we've been talking previously about the early church plans. We talked about the Basilican style church, right? That longitudinal or long church, and also the central plan church, which basically is around a central dome. And what's interesting about this is we see these architects really employing both church formats. We see, of course, the Great Dome in the center. That is very much based on the central plan church. But we see that they have continued these kind of large half dome structures on either side. These are a real kind of homage to the longitudinal plan. So it's an integration of both. Now, the dome of that church was built to impress. And if we look at it, we can see right away it's different than other domes that we've seen so far. And that other dome, of course, is the Pantheon. One of the reasons it looks so different than the Pantheon is that it is not an oculus, right, dome where we don't see, or it's not hemispherical with the oculus or the light emanating from the center. Rather, what we see here is this extraordinary clerestory or ring of windows around the base of the dome. This was considered to be absolutely phenomenal at the time to allow light to kind of enter in this kind of resplendent way. And in fact, if you look at the walls of the Hagia Sophia, lots of windows, so light really pouring in to this church. How did they do this? And the answer is in the diagram there on the right. They used pendentives. Pendentives are these triangular forms that we can see here that work to transfer a square room into a circular dome. And they take basically the entirety of the support of the dome on these giant pylons here. That support the structure above. This was an ingenious new innovation of the time, allowing then for the piercing of the walls of the dome, as well as these niches and the walls as well here, because they were not supportive structures. And this was a kind of extraordinary breakthrough at the time. And makes it significantly different than the Pantheon, which, of course, as we know, was supported by 10-foot wide concrete walls. This band of 40 windows was, remarked upon at the time, and people noted the way that the dome seemed to levitate as if it was actually a dome of heaven. And this also was contributed to by the extraordinary kind of lavish materials used by Justinian and his team. There is, of course, you can see the difference between the Pantheon and the Hagia Sophia, that oculus, and we talked about the Pantheon as being fairly dark when you walk inside. When I went in, it was actually a rainy day, and was overcast, so it was quite dark, as opposed to the Hagia Sophia, which is this kind of resplendent, light-filled space. Oopsie. So let's go back here to that original plan. One of the reasons that there was this kind of sense of kind of overwhelming kind of awe by this was that the entire interior was covered in gold mosaic work. Of course, as we know, these kind of small tesserae or glass and small stones placed onto the wall, creating these kind of extraordinary reflective surfaces. So one would go inside and they would see the light reflecting, creating this kind of brilliant interior space. Now, the altar was placed directly below the dome. And the idea here is that in the Greek Orthodox practice, as it develops here in the East in Constantinople, the clergy would process around the altar, and thus there would be this circumambulation around the altar, as opposed to the West, where we see church services proceeding down the central nave of the aisle. This circular format, interestingly, then becomes reflected in the dome above, circumambulating around the altar, the dome above, and a circular twinning, if you will, of the actual service, which was really extraordinary. And in this way, the architecture, therefore mirroring the actual service. Um, Interestingly, also, the Byzantines believed that through meditation and prayer, one could actually spiritually ascend to a higher spiritual state. And that is also reflected in the architecture of the Hagia Sophia, with this kind of extraordinary dome that kind of, towers above, with this kind of gold-filled environment with light reflecting on the interior. One is literally kind of transported, if you will, into this rarefied spiritual state, and literally has this kind of sense of spiritual ascendance, this kind of physical environment really evoking this spiritual reaction within the viewers. So it's really a really interesting, quite special and magnificent building that I hope I haven't bored you too much with this 11-minute video, but what the heck, live dangerously. And I'll see you guys soon.